It was supposed to be a farewell to summer, 3 days off the grid at Blackwood Lake. Just me, Leo, my fiancée Maya, and my oldest friend, Derek. In hindsight, the geometry of our trio was flawed from the start. Derek and I shared a history that stretched back to middle school. We had a language of half-insults and inside jokes that felt like a second skin. Maya, on the other hand, was my future. She was an architect, a woman who lived her life with beautiful, deliberate precision. She didn't rough it, but she had bought a high-end sleeping bag and a pair of hiking boots just to be part of my world for the weekend. I loved her for that effort. Derek, however, saw it as a performance. He had a way of taking up all the oxygen in a room, or, in this case, the clearing around the fire pit. From the moment we unpacked the car, there was a subtle, grating friction. Derek was the wild, spontaneous camper. Maya was the one who packed the first aid kit and organized the cooler. I thought I could bridge the gap. I was wrong. The first day went surprisingly well. We hiked the lower trails, swam in the freezing lake, and by nightfall, we were exhausted in that satisfying, bone-deep way. I built a fire. Derek cracked open a bottle of expensive bourbon he'd brought to celebrate the ball and chain, winking at me when he said it. Maya smiled, a tight, polite expression. She sat next to me on a fallen log, her shoulder pressing into mine. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling like the luckiest guy in the world. I had my best friend and my future wife under a canopy of stars. But as the bourbon level dropped, Derek's volume rose. His jokes shifted from self-deprecating tales of his own terrible dating life to hyper-focused observations about us. Or, more accurately, about Maya. "You know, Leo," Derek said, poking the fire with a long stick, sending a shower of orange sparks into the dark. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd be drinking herbal tea in the woods. You used to funnel cheap beer until you threw up in my dad's bushes. Now look at you. Domesticated." "People grow up, Derek," Maya said mildly, sipping her tea from a tin mug. "Oh, sure they do," Derek laughed, a sound that was a little too loud for the quiet forest. "But Leo didn't just grow up. He got a software update. Maya OS. He doesn't even watch football on Sundays anymore. He goes to farmers markets." He said the last two words as if they were a disease. I chuckled. "The produce is better, man. What can I say?" I was trying to play the peacekeeper. Diffuse the tension with agreement. Derek wasn't done. He took a long pull from the bottle. The firelight cast sharp, dancing shadows across his face, making his usual boyish grin look predatory. He leaned forward, locking his eyes on Maya. "It's impressive, really," Derek continued. "You totally broke him. I used to think nobody could tame the wild Leo, but you just slapped a designer collar on him and trained him to fetch organic kale." The air grew thick. Maya shifted beside me. Her shoulder pulled away from mine by just an inch, but it felt like a mile. "I didn't train him," she said, her voice dropping a register, losing its polite, conversational tone. "He just realized there's more to life than hangovers." Right, Derek said, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. "But let's be honest. We all know how you did it." He looked at me, then back to Maya, his grin widening into something nasty. "You got him by the balls, Maya. Literally. Leo told me you guys instituted a chore chart before you moved in together. He actually said to me, 'Derek, if I don't clean the bathroom on Tuesdays, I don't get laid on Wednesdays. You're rationing intimacy for housekeeping.'" My stomach dropped into my boots. It was a gross, twisted exaggeration of a private complaint I had drunkenly vented to Derek months ago, a private marital frustration weaponized into a punchline. I should have stopped it right there. I should have stood up, told Derek to shut his mouth, and defended the woman I was going to marry. But I didn't. Instead, a nervous, involuntary sound escaped my throat. It was a laugh. A pathetic, hollow bark of laughter, born out of a decade of conditioning to always laugh at Derek's jokes, out of male cowardice, out of a desperate, panicked desire to keep the mood light. Derek heard my laugh and barked a triumphant laugh of his own, slapping his knee. "See, he knows it's true. The clipboard dictator." I looked at Maya. I was still smiling, a frozen, idiotic grimace on my face. She wasn't smiling. The firelight reflected in her eyes, but there was no warmth in them. They were completely, terrifyingly cold. She didn't look angry. She looked like she had just realized she was sitting next to a stranger. The laughter died in my throat, choking me. The woods suddenly felt incredibly silent, save for the crackle of the burning wood. Maya slowly set her tin mug down on the dirt. She didn't say a word to Derek. She turned her head and looked directly at me. It was a look of profound, unadulterated betrayal. I had shared our private life with my friend, and worse, I had laughed while he used it to humiliate her. She stood up. She brushed the ash off her expensive new hiking pants. Maya, I finally croaked, my voice sounding weak and pathetic. He's just messing around. She didn't answer. She didn't yell. She turned her back to the fire, switched on her headlamp, and walked away from the clearing. The beam of her light cut through the dark pines as she headed toward our tent. We heard the zipper of the tent open and then zip shut. Derek took another sip of bourbon. Wow, someone can't take a joke. I just sat there, staring at the fire. The woman I loved was 50 yards away in the dark, and my best friend was beside me. And in that moment, sitting there like an absolute idiot, I realized I had just destroyed my own life. Derek took another sip from his bottle, the glass clinking against his teeth. He let out a long sigh, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates of my life shifting beneath my feet. Man, women, Derek muttered, shaking his head with a condescending chuckle. They always have to make it a thing, don't they? You can't even tell a joke around a campfire anymore without someone taking it as a personal attack. He looked at me, expecting the usual camaraderie, the shared nod of the beleaguered brotherhood we had formed in our 20s. I couldn't look at him. I stared into the glowing orange embers. It wasn't a joke, Derek, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the first time I had ever pushed back against him, but it was 10 minutes too late and delivered to the wrong person. Oh, come on, Leo, Derek groaned, tossing a small twig into the fire. Don't tell me you're actually going to apologize to her for my joke. You laughed too. We both know she runs the schedule. I was just saying out loud what you complain about when we get beers. That was the poison of it. He was right. I had complained. In moments of weakness, when I felt overwhelmed by Maya's meticulous planning and high standards, I had vented to my oldest friend. I had handed him the ammunition, and tonight, I had stood by while he loaded the gun and fired it at the woman I loved. I didn't defend her. I didn't defend myself. I just sat there like a coward, watching the fire slowly suffocate under its own ash. It took me another 20 minutes to finally stand up. Every muscle in my body felt leaden. Derek had already started nodding off in his camp chair, the bourbon bottle resting precariously on his thigh. I didn't wake him. I didn't want to hear his voice again. I grabbed my flashlight and turned away from the clearing. The path to our tent was only 50 yards, but it felt like a march to an execution. The crunch of my boots on the dry pine needles sounded obscenely loud. The temperature had dropped significantly, the mountain air biting through my flannel shirt, but the chill on my skin was nothing compared to the ice in my stomach. What could I possibly say? I'm sorry he's a jerk. I'm sorry I'm spineless. I'm sorry I traded your dignity for a cheap laugh with a guy who hasn't matured past college. None of it would work. Maya wasn't a woman who threw screaming tantrums. She was an architect. She understood structural integrity. And tonight, she had seen the fatal flaw in the foundation of our relationship. I wasn't a safe place. I was a liability. I reached the tent. The thin nylon walls glowed faintly from the moonlight, but her headlamp was off. It was completely dark inside. I slowly unzipped the flap, wincing at the loud, abrasive sound of the teeth separating. I crawled inside, pulling off my boots with trembling hands. The air inside the small dome was thick with tension. Maya was lying on her side, facing the fabric wall, zipped entirely into her expensive Sub-Zero sleeping bag. She looked like a cocoon. I knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was too shallow, too controlled. I slid into my own sleeping bag, my body mere inches from hers. The physical proximity only highlighted the massive emotional chasm between us. Maya, I whispered into the dark. My voice cracked. She didn't move. She didn't adjust her breathing. Maya, I'm so sorry. He crossed a line. He was drunk, and I panicked. I should have shut him down. I was an idiot. The silence stretched on for a full minute. I lay there, staring at the curved ceiling of the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs. Finally, a voice came from the depths of her sleeping bag. It was flat, exhausted, and devoid of the warmth that usually defined her. You didn't panic, Leo, she said quietly to the nylon wall. You agreed with him. Good night. She didn't say another word. I lay awake for the next 6 hours, listening to the wind tear through the trees, knowing that my life as I knew it was unraveling in the dark. First light hit the tent like a gray, unforgiving interrogation lamp. The temperature had plummeted overnight, leaving a thin layer of frost on the inside of the rainfly. My body was stiff, cramped from lying in the exact same position all night, terrified that moving would disturb the fragile silence. I turned my head. Maya's sleeping bag was empty. Panic, sharp and cold, spiked in my chest. I scrambled out of my bag, unzipped the tent, and stumbled out into the freezing morning fog. She hadn't left the campsite. She was standing by the picnic table, fully dressed in her hiking gear, her hair pulled back into a tight, severe ponytail. She was methodically organizing the camp kitchen, packing the portable stove into its carrying case. Her movements were brutally efficient. There was no lingering, no enjoying the crisp morning air. She was executing an evacuation. "Morning," I croaked, my breath pluming in the cold air. She didn't look up from the stove. "I'm packing my things. We're leaving." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a logistical update. "Maya, please. Let's talk about this." I stepped toward her, reaching out to touch her arm. She took a smooth, deliberate step backward, out of my reach. The rejection was physical and absolute. "There is nothing to talk about, Leo. You want me to organize the cooler, or do you want to do it?" Before I could answer, the loud, groaning sound of a tent zipper ripping open echoed across the site. Derek emerged from his single tent, looking like a bear waking up from hibernation. His hair was a mess, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was rubbing his temples. "Ugh, man," Derek groaned, stretching his arms. "My head is pounding. Did someone get the coffee going?" He looked at Maya, who was silently breaking down the folding table. Derek, completely blind to the radioactive atmosphere, offered a weak, hungover smirk. "Silent treatment this morning, huh? Guess the Maya OS needs a reboot." Maya stopped what she was doing. She slowly stood up straight and looked at Derek. It was the same cold, terrifying look she had given me by the fire. "Derek," she said, her voice perfectly level. "If you speak to me again, I will leave you in this forest and take the car myself. Do you understand?" Derek's smirk vanished. He looked at me, his eyes wide, silently asking me to intervene, to save him from this crazy woman. I looked at him, and for the first time in 15 years, I felt absolute, burning hatred for my best friend. "Pack your stuff, Derek," I snapped. "We're leaving." It took exactly 45 minutes to break down a camp that took us 2 hours to build. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the slamming of the trunk and the crunch of tires on the gravel road as I pulled out of Blackwood Lake. The drive back to the city was supposed to be 3 hours. It felt like 3 years. Derek sat in the back seat, nursing a bottle of water and a brutal hangover, finally intimidated into silence. Maya sat in the passenger seat. She didn't sleep. She didn't look at her phone. She just stared straight ahead through the windshield, watching the pine trees blur into highway concrete. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every few minutes, I would steal a glance at her. I looked at the diamond ring on her left hand, resting motionless on her knee. Just a week ago, that ring was a promise of a shared future, of a house in the suburbs and Sunday mornings in bed. Now, catching the dull gray light of the overcast sky, it looked like a shackle she was waiting for the right moment to unlock. I wanted to pull the car over. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness. But the silence in the car was so heavy, so fragile, that I knew any word I spoke would just be another mistake. I hadn't just ruined a camping trip. I had shown her exactly who I was when it mattered most, and she had realized she didn't want to marry a coward. We pulled up to Derek's apartment complex in the late afternoon. The sky was the color of bruised iron. I put the car in park, the engine idling loudly in the suffocating silence. Derek climbed out of the back seat, dragging his duffel bag onto the sidewalk. He leaned down, looking through the open passenger window at Maya, then at me. The hangover seemed to have finally given way to a nervous realization that he had actually broken something he couldn't fix with a beer. "Look, guys," Derek stammered, his usual bravado completely stripped away. I'm really sorry about last night. I was out of line. The bourbon was talking. We cool?" Maya didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead on the concrete wall of the parking garage. I looked at Derek, my oldest friend, The guy who had been there through every major milestone of my life. I saw him clearly for the first time, a grown man who still thought cruelty was a punchline. "Get your stuff and go, Derek," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was entirely useless now. "Don't call me." Derek blinked, shocked. "Leo, come on, man." I said go. I shouted, hitting the steering wheel with the palm of my hand. He took a step back, holding his hands up defensively, and walked away toward his building. I rolled the window up, sealing us back into our private tomb, and drove the remaining 4 miles to our apartment. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was a beautiful space, filled with light and mid-century modern furniture that Maya had painstakingly sourced. It was a physical manifestation of the life we were building together. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of the vanilla reeds Maya kept on the entryway table. We carried the camping gear inside in complete silence, making trip after agonizing trip from the elevator to the living room. I dropped the cooler on the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. Maya walked past me, carrying her own backpack. She didn't let me help her with anything. Every time I reached for a bag she was holding, she simply shifted her weight and walked around me, treating me like a piece of furniture that was in her way. The physical exhaustion of the trip was nothing compared to the psychological drain of her silence. We were standing in our living room, surrounded by our things, but the distance between us felt intercontinental. Maya went straight to the laundry room. She began pulling her clothes out of her bag, sorting the darks from the lights with mechanical precision. I stood in the doorway, watching her. Everything smelled like campfire smoke. It clung to our hair, our jackets, our skin. Just a day ago, I had thought it was the smell of a perfect weekend. Now, it was the smell of the exact moment I had failed her. "Maya." I tried again, stepping into the small room. "Please, yell at me. Throw something. Do anything but this. I am so sorry." I froze. I was a coward. I know that. She closed the washing machine door and pressed the start button. The machine hummed to life, filling the silence with a steady, rhythmic churning. She turned to face me. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, but her posture was rigid. "You didn't freeze, Leo," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Freezing is when you don't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do. You laughed. You chose him. You chose to be part of the joke instead of the punchline." She walked past me into the kitchen. I followed her, desperate, feeling like a man watching water pour into the hull of a sinking ship, trying to bail it out with a teaspoon. She walked over to the kitchen island, the beautiful marble counter we had picked out together when we moved in. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, setting it down gently. Then, she raised her left hand. With her right thumb and forefinger, she grasped the diamond engagement ring I had given her 6 months ago. She didn't hesitate. She slid it over her knuckle and placed it on the marble counter. Clink. The sound was tiny, but in the quiet apartment, it sounded like a bomb going off. "Maya, no. Please don't do that," I begged, the tears finally spilling over my eyelids. I reached out to grab the ring, but she put her hand flat on the counter, blocking me. "Don't touch it, Leo," she warned. "I'm not doing this to punish you," Maya said, looking at the ring, then up at me. "I am doing this because I cannot marry a man who lacks the fundamental instinct to protect me. I would protect you from anything." I cried out, my voice breaking. "You know I would." "Would you?" She tilted her head, a sad, analytical expression on her face. "If someone tried to rob us on the street, yes, I believe you would step in front of me. But that's easy, Leo. That's movie heroism. Real protection is standing up to your friends when they demean your partner. Real protection is defending our private life when someone uses it as a weapon." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You told him about our intimate life. You told him about my requests for how we run our household, and you framed it like I was a dictator. And when he used that to humiliate me, to strip away my dignity in front of the fire, you laughed. You looked at me, saw that I was hurting, and you laughed so Derek wouldn't think you were whipped." Every word was a surgical strike. She wasn't yelling. She was dissecting my character, laying out my flaws on the marble counter next to the ring. "I love you," I whispered, the only defense I had left, knowing how pathetic it sounded in the face of her logic. "I know you do," she replied softly, and for a split second, a flicker of genuine sorrow crossed her face. "But love isn't enough when there is no respect. And last night, You showed me exactly how much respect you demand from me when it's inconvenient for you. She picked up her phone from the counter. I am going to take a shower, she said, her tone shifting back to the logistical, architectural precision she used for her job. I am going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, while you are at work, I am going to pack the rest of my things. My sister is coming to help me move my furniture on Saturday. Maya, please, we can go to counseling. We can fix this. A structural failure in the foundation cannot be fixed with a fresh coat of paint, Leo, she said, turning toward the hallway. The house is coming down. She walked into the bathroom and closed the door. The lock clicked into place. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the diamond ring resting on the cold marble, the smell of campfire ash still thick in my lungs. I didn't sleep in our bedroom that night. I couldn't bear the expanse of the king-sized bed without her in it. Instead, I lay on the living room sofa, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I heard the guest room door open. Soft footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. I held my breath, a foolish, desperate hope sparking in my chest that she was coming to wake me, to tell me we could figure it out. But the footsteps bypassed the living room entirely. They went to the hall closet. Then I heard it, the sharp, abrasive shriek of packing tape being pulled from a dispenser. It was the most agonizing sound I had ever heard. Every rip of tape was a physical manifestation of her packing away our future. She wasn't crying. She wasn't throwing things. She was methodically, quietly taking apart her life from mine in the middle of the night. I lay there, paralyzed by my own guilt, listening to the cardboard boxes taking shape, knowing I had no right to stop her. Morning broke with a dull, gray light filtering through the blinds. I sat up, my body aching from the sofa. The apartment already felt different. It felt unbalanced. I walked into the kitchen. The diamond ring was still sitting exactly where she had left it on the marble island, catching the weak morning light. Maya was at the coffee maker. She was dressed in sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked exhausted, but her movements were entirely purposeful. "Good morning," I said, my voice thick and tentative. She didn't look up as she poured her coffee into a travel mug. "I've cleared out my half of the bathroom," she said, her voice strictly informational. "I'll tackle the closet today while you're at work." "Maya, I took the day off," I pleaded, stepping closer. "I'm not going to work. We need to talk. I can't just leave you here to pack up your life." She finally stopped and looked at me. Her eyes were empty, devoid of the warmth that had anchored me for the last 3 years. "Leo, my life is already packed. I'm just putting the objects into boxes. If you stay here today, you will just be standing in my way. Please go to work." She treated me not like an enemy, but like a ghost. I had already faded from her reality. Defeated, I grabbed my briefcase, put on a suit I felt like a fraud wearing, and walked out the door. I didn't go to the office. I couldn't. I drove to a park across town and sat in my car for hours, watching the rain streak the windshield. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. It was Derek. "Hey man, checking in. Is Maya OS still glitching today, or are you allowed to come out for a beer later?" The rage that surged through me was blinding. It was hot, violent, and entirely misdirected. I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, chuckling. There he is, the survivor of the woods. "Shut your mouth, Derek," I snarled, my voice shaking with a fury I had never directed at him before. "Shut your mouth and listen to me." She took her ring off. "She's packing her bags right now. We're done." The line went dead silent. The chuckle vanished. "Whoa, Leo man, are you serious? Over a joke?" It wasn't a joke. I screamed into the steering wheel, my voice cracking. "It was my life, and you used my private conversations to humiliate her, and I let you do it because I was too weak to tell you to back off. Do not text me again. Do not call me. I never want to see your face again." I hung up and threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I breathed heavily, my chest heaving. I had finally stood up to Derek. I had finally drawn the line. But as I sat alone in the cold car, the victory tasted like ash. I had found my spine 24 hours too late. Firing the arsonist doesn't unburn the house. I pushed the front door open at 6 p.m. The first thing that hit me was the visual echo. The apartment had been stripped of its soul. The mid-century armchair she loved reading in was gone. The framed architectural prints she had hung in the hallway were missing, leaving pale rectangles on the painted walls. Her favorite throw blankets, the plants she watered every Sunday, the stack of design magazines on the coffee table, all vanished. Half a dozen brown cardboard boxes were stacked neatly by the front door, taped shut and labeled with a thick black marker in her precise, architectural handwriting. Kitchen Maya. Books Maya. Winter clothes Maya. I walked through the empty spaces, my footsteps echoing louder than before. The ring was still on the kitchen counter. It was the only piece of her that remained, a tiny, brilliant monument to my failure. I picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. I put it in my pocket, unable to look at it anymore. Saturday morning arrived with the finality of an execution block. I was sitting on a single dining chair in the living room when the buzzer rang. Maya opened the door before I could. Her younger sister, Chloe, stood in the hallway. Chloe and I had always gotten along great. We used to team up to tease Maya about her obsession with symmetry. But today, Chloe didn't say hello. She didn't even look at me. Behind Chloe stood two burly movers. "The boxes are over there," Maya told the movers, pointing to the stack. "The bedroom furniture is down the hall." I stood up, desperate to contribute, to show some semblance of care. "Chloe, let me help you with those smaller boxes." Chloe stepped physically in front of me, blocking my path to Maya's things. Her eyes were blazing with a protective fury that I should have shown at the campfire. "Don't touch her stuff, Leo," Chloe spat, her voice dripping with disgust. "You've done enough. Just stand there and stay out of the way." I recoiled as if I'd been struck. I looked at Maya, hoping for a sliver of mercy, but she was busy instructing the movers on how to wrap her drafting desk. She didn't even turn around. I was officially a spectator to my own ruin. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of watching strangers carry out the physical evidence of our shared life. When the last box was loaded onto the elevator, the movers nodded and headed down. Chloe glared at me one last time before following them. Maya stood in the threshold of the open front door. She had her purse over her shoulder and her car keys in her hand. The apartment behind me felt cavernous and dead. "I've paid my half of the rent through the end of the month," she said, looking not at my eyes, but at my chin. "The leasing office knows I'm breaking my portion of the lease. You'll need to decide if you're staying or breaking yours." "Maya," I whispered, stepping forward. I didn't reach for her. I knew better now. Is this really it? 3 years, gone because of one night? She finally met my eyes. The coldness had melted into a profound, exhausted sadness. "It wasn't one night, Leo," she said softly. "It was the realization that if I ever truly needed you to defend me against your friends, your family, the world, you would check the temperature of the room before you decided to stand up for me. I can't build a life on a foundation that crumbles when someone makes a joke." She reached out and placed her set of apartment keys on the small entryway table. "Goodbye, Leo." She stepped back into the hallway. The heavy wooden door swung shut. The lock engaged with a sharp, metallic click. I was entirely alone. The first week was a masterclass in denial. I went to work, I came home, and I waited for the front door to open. I kept expecting Maya to walk in, drop her keys in the ceramic bowl on the entryway table, and complain about the contractors on her latest project. But the bowl remained empty, save for my own keys. The apartment, once filled with the warm hum of our shared life, the smell of her roasting vegetables, the sound of her drafting pencils scratching against paper, the low volume of the jazz playlist she liked on Sunday mornings, was now a sterile, silent tomb. I stopped cooking. I ordered takeout and ate it standing over the sink. Without her furniture, the living room was just a vast expanse of hardwood floor. I sat on my sofa, staring at the blank wall where her art used to hang, drinking cheap whiskey and replaying the campfire scene over and over in my head until I felt physically sick. Every time the memory looped, my silence sounded louder. Then came the public unraveling. We had been together for 3 years. Our lives were inextricably tangled online and offline. On day 10, Maya untagged herself from all our recent photos on social media. She didn't block me, which somehow felt worse. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of administration. She simply removed her digital footprint from my life. My phone started blowing up with texts from mutual friends. "Hey man, is everything okay?" Maya just changed her status. "Leo, what happened?" I didn't know how to answer them. I was a coward at a campfire, and she realized I was a fraud didn't exactly fit into a text message. I ignored them all. I also checked my blocked messages folder. Derek had tried to call twice and left a text saying, "Bro, you're overreacting. Let's grab a beer." I deleted the thread completely. I had finally excised the tumor, but the patient was already dead. By the end of the first month, the apartment had become a torture chamber. Every scratch on the floorboards, every tile in the bathroom reminded me of the life we had planned. I couldn't afford the rent on my own anyway. I went to the leasing office and broke my half of the lease, paying a massive penalty that decimated my savings. I hired 2 guys with a truck to move my remaining furniture into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment across town. It had bad lighting, outdated appliances, and windows that looked out onto a brick wall. It was exactly what I deserved. As I handed my keys to the landlord, I felt the final tether snap. The physical space we had chosen together was gone. Maya OS was permanently uninstalled, and my system was completely crashing. Autumn bled into a bitter, gray winter. My life shrank to the size of a postage stamp. I woke up, I went to my logistics job, I came back to my dark apartment, and I slept. I didn't date. I didn't go out. I started seeing a therapist in January. It was the one productive thing I did. Sitting in a leather chair under fluorescent lights, I finally unpacked the toxic loyalty I had held for Derek, the fragile male ego that made me prioritize a cheap laugh over my partner's dignity, and the profound lack of structural integrity Maya had correctly identified in me. "You're grieving the loss of the relationship," Dr. Evans told me one snowy Tuesday. "But you're also grieving the version of yourself you thought you were." Maya held up a mirror, and you didn't like the reflection. She was right. I kept the diamond ring in a small velvet box on my nightstand. I didn't look at it often, but knowing it was there was my daily penance. 7 months had passed since Blackwood Lake. It was April, and the city was just beginning to thaw. I was forced out of my hibernation by an obligation I couldn't break: the wedding of my cousin, Sarah. Maya had helped Sarah pick out her floral arrangements before the breakup. I had debated not going, but my family had already endured enough of my brooding absence. The reception was at a sleek, modern art gallery downtown. I stood near the back of the room, nursing a club soda, trying to blend into the shadows. The string quartet was playing, people were laughing, and the air smelled of expensive catering. And then, the crowd parted, and the air was sucked out of my lungs. Maya was there. She was standing near the champagne tower, talking to the bride. She was wearing a stunning, deep emerald dress that I had never seen before. Her hair was cut shorter, grazing her shoulders, and she looked vibrant. She looked rested. She looked like a woman who had successfully removed a heavy, useless weight from her shoulders. My feet felt cemented to the floor. I watched her laugh at something Sarah said. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in almost a year. A man stepped up beside her. He was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed one to Maya and placed his hand gently, respectfully, on the small of her back. She turned to him, smiled warmly, and leaned into his touch. There was no hesitation, no tension, just easy, secure affection. My heart shattered all over again, but this time, the shards were smaller, sharper. I had spent 7 months in purgatory, agonizing over my mistake, going to therapy, trying to rebuild my character from the ground up. I had secretly, foolishly hoped that maybe, given enough time, she would see my growth. But while I was busy staring at the ashes of the campfire, she had walked out of the woods and built a new house. She turned her head, scanning the room. For one terrifying, electric second, her eyes locked onto mine across the gallery. Her eyes met mine. For a second, time in the gallery stopped. The string quartet faded into a dull hum, and the crowd around us simply dissolved. I waited for her to turn away, expecting her eyes to flash with anger or contempt, just like that night by the fire. But there was nothing like that. Just a calm, quiet recognition. Her companion said something, and she gave him a small nod, touching his arm. He stepped away toward the bar, leaving her alone. This was my chance to turn around and leave. To hide in the crowd and remain the ghost I had been for the last 7 months. But months of therapy and isolation had taught me one thing. Cowardice always hides in avoidance. I couldn't run away again. I took a deep breath, set my club soda down on a passing waiter's tray, and walked across the room directly toward her. As I got closer, I felt like I had forgotten how to breathe. "Hi, Maya," I said. My voice was surprisingly level and calm. "Hi, Leo. You look well," she replied. Her voice was soft, devoid of that icy wall I remembered so vividly from our last conversation in our kitchen. You too. That color looks beautiful on you. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by people, yet stranded on the deserted island of our past. I didn't come over to intrude or ruin your evening, I started, looking her directly in the eyes. And I'm certainly not here to ask for a second chance. I just wanted to say what I should have said 10 months ago at Blackwood Lake. You were right. About everything. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, watching my face. I let Derek humiliate you because I was afraid of looking weak in front of a friend. But the real weakness was failing to protect the most important person in my life. Derek and I don't speak anymore. I've done a lot of work on myself. I know it doesn't fix what I broke, but I needed you to know. I learned the lesson. You always deserved someone who wouldn't hesitate to stand by your side. Maya looked at me, and for the first time in almost a year, I saw genuine warmth in her eyes. It wasn't love, not the kind I craved, but it was sincere respect. Thank you, Leo, she said quietly. I really needed to hear that, and I'm glad you found the strength to understand it. I don't hold on to the anger anymore. I truly wish you the best. Before I could say another word, the man in the charcoal suit returned, seamlessly navigating the crowd with 2 glasses of champagne. He looked at me, not with suspicion, territoriality, or the frat boy sizing up that Derek would have done, but with a polite, open curiosity. He handed Maya her glass, his fingers lightly brushing hers. It was a subtle, undeniable gesture of grounding and support. David, Maya said, her voice bright and steady. This is Leo, an old friend. Leo, this is David. An old friend. The words stung, but they were true. David extended his free hand. His grip was firm, warm, and professional. Nice to meet you, Leo. Maya's told me you two go way back. If he knew the story of the campfire, he possessed the maturity and grace not to let it show. I looked at the way David stood. He was slightly angled toward Maya, instinctively placing himself in a position of quiet partnership. He was the kind of man who would never, under any circumstances, use the woman he loved as a punchline to impress his buddies. It's a pleasure to meet you, David, I said, offering a genuine, if slightly heartbroken, smile. I took one last look at Maya. She was glowing, secure in a foundation that would never crack under the weight of a cheap joke. I should get back to my table, I told them, taking a step back. Have a beautiful evening, both of you. You too, Leo, Maya said. And this time, when she said goodbye, there was no sharp click of a lock following it, just the gentle hum of a closed chapter. I didn't stay for the cake or the dancing. I walked out of the gallery and into the crisp April night. When I got back to my small apartment, I didn't pour a glass of whiskey. I walked into the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and took out the velvet box containing the diamond ring. I didn't open it. I walked over to the closet, placed it inside a storage box on the top shelf, and closed the door. I didn't need it on my nightstand as a daily punishment anymore. The fire at Blackwood Lake had burned my life to the ground. But as I turned off the lamp and lay down in the dark, I realized it had also burned away the coward I used to be. The ashes were finally cold, and for the first time in a year, I was ready to build something new.